Applause broke over the ballroom as the slide changed to my figure, my colors, my axis labels, my misspelled legend. The famous lecturer smiled into the lights and called it his novel framework. I stood up so fast my chair hit the carpet with a hollow thud. The Heinz Convention Center in Boston does this thing in late afternoon, where the sunlight angles through the high glass and washes the carpet pattern into something almost dignified. After 4 days of panels on urban systems resilience, nobody was dignified anymore. People were half limping on sensible shoes, nursing coffee like pennants. But the keynote was packed. It was the name that did it. The name that sells out rooms and donor dinners. Grey hair, perfect dishevelment, the accent that could make base layer algorithm sound flirtatious. On the third slide, he shaded a corridor of confidence intervals in amaranth red, mine. On the fifth, a sensitivity map with a triangular artifact at the Spree crossing that we'd all teased each other about in the lab because the artifact looked like a paper sailboat. Mine. On the seventh, he referenced fieldwork in Warsaw's Mokotów district, Q4, 2024. Mine down to the bus stop coordinates. He called it the Engel model of flood-oriented evacuation. He did not call it what I had called it in my thesis proposal at Technische Universität Berlin, the essay Corridor Heuristic, a kludgy name I never loved, but marked with my initials, like a tag carved into a bench. My throat went dry behind my molars. I wasn't the only person who recognized things. A Czech postdoc named Lukáš Marek, in the row ahead of me, turned halfway with an expression that was both apology and question. On the screen, the novel framework ran a synthetic flood across a grid of streets that matched ours, block for block, because they were ours. Someone behind me whispered, "Didn't we see this in Berlin's seminar last winter?" Whispered again, "Didn't she?" He had timed it. He saved the acknowledgement slide for last, the way you might save dessert. He clicked, and a list of institutions scrolled. ETH Zurich, University of Cambridge, MIT Urban Studies, the Engel Lab. Underneath, small, a bullet. Data assistants and technicians from partner institutions. I felt my face get hot and then cold. Technician. I'd spent 3 winters hip-deep in the kind of data that cuts your fingers under your nails. Technician. When I stood in anger, in grief, the metal legs of the chair grazed the carpet, heads turned. He smiled into the stage lights and said thank you like it ended there. The applause swelled. The moderator did the conference thing of glancing at the clock and urging everyone to scurry to the next room. I didn't scurry. I walked the side aisle and out into the foyer, where the carpet gave way to tile and the tile gave way to the city. Boston in March is a face-slapping wind down Boylston Street and a smell of train brakes. I found a pillar and leaned against it hard enough that I felt the rebar. My hands were shaking, not with adrenaline, but with the sudden emptiness of someone who only now realizes a line has been crossed and looks around for the border guard to stamp something, anything. Behind me, the famous lecturer's entourage did the swell and eddy of people who are important enough to be trailed. I watched him sign a program for a graduate student. His smile was measured, kind, exactly the amount he intended. When he looked up, he saw me. I know the instant a predator clocks the animal that has spotted it. His expression did a brief, private calculus and returned benign. "Hello, Sophia," he said, switching to German warmth, the way he always did when he wanted to treat my fury like a small wave to surf. Good to see familiar faces across the ocean. I did not offer him my hand. "You used my figures," I said, with my mistakes intact. He laughed, a non-flustered chuff. "There are no mistakes, only stages," he said, which was something he liked to say when he retrofitted ethics to convenience. "And of course, we'll sort the authorship when the paper is finalized. This was a keynote, not a paper. You know how these things go." He gestured broadly at the world, like the world had rules that favored him, which, to be fair, it often did. "I sent you the preprint on 10th of January, I said. "You wrote promising and asked for my raw code because reviewers love to poke at code. I sent the code on 12th of January. My GitHub logs show the clone at 10:47 that night." My voice stayed steady because I had rehearsed the facts every time I woke at 3 a.m., since he'd asked me for that code. CPR, Sophia, model to Engel, model. Tidy up the headers, remove my initials, swap in a paragraph on prior lab work. "My dear," he said, which is what men say when they need to belittle you without being caught at it, "we are a team." I'm not on your team, I said. I'm on my dissertation committees, which I chair. He smiled. A little piece of me cracked like ice under a boot. I had to choose then between public scene and private record. I chose the record. I'll see you at the panel QA, I said, with questions. I turned and left because dignity is always better when you can afford it. I walked to the Hilton on Dalton, pressed my palms to my face in the elevator, and took them away, hoping to leave the anger on the metal. In my room, my laptop waited like a good dog. I opened the folder marked SA Heuristic Panels, the one with the contingency I'd built into my life like a life jacket. If you do any work with data and power, make a folder called Contingency and put a copy of yourself there. You want to know who he was to me before all this? He was the visiting star who made a cold Berlin winter feel like you were fortunate to be small. He was Swiss-German with an American second act. He sold the Engel Lab as a brand of daring pragmatism, bridging policy and pipe diameter. He drank black espresso like it made him honest. He talked to maintenance staff as if they were instrument techs, which made people love him. He learned birthdays. He sent reading lists at midnight like a romance without bodies. He had a rule about no laptops in first meetings that made you feel like you were entering a monastery. And he watched which of us took notes anyway and praised those who did. The first red flag was a blessing that sounded like a warning. In May 2023, after my first-year review, he wrote a recommendation for a small internal grant and called me uniquely detail-obsessed in service of a broader human goal. It should have been a compliment, but detail-obsessed is also what you call someone when you need to. Later say they didn't see the big picture. It defines a person by their parts. I saved the letter because I save everything. The second red flag was his habit of putting team lead next to his name on documents he had not led. The third was the way he said, just tidy up the model for me so I can show it to funding agency, as if tidy meant replace the name on the first slide. I believed in him because the first people you meet in a new field are often the template you accept until you have thicker skin. I came to Berlin from Valencia via a civil engineering degree in Madrid, a little too proud of my calculus grades and a little too naive about politics. I rented a cold room in Wedding with a window you could hear the tram through like a heartbeat. I ate currywurst on paydays and chickpea stews on other days. I built a life of public transport and cheap theatre tickets, and a habit of doing one generous thing per day for a person who would not remember my name. This is not a romance, it is a record. By the time I came back down to the next panel, I had a plan. Be boring, be precise, do not be baited into a fight without a rapper's mic. The QA on evacuation algorithms for mixed-income coastal districts drew the hungry and the polite. He sat in the second row like a king deigning to be on the floor, not the dais. I asked the third question, because first questions at panels are like first pancakes, always a little raw. I stood, stated my name and affiliation, and asked, would the lecturer be willing to share his model's Git commit history for the post-storm grid iterations, especially around the thresholding function for road closures? My voice only trembled on share. He smiled because he had a social face for being questioned. That level of detail isn't necessary for a keynote, but of course we're always eager to share code upon publication, he said to a general nod, because the audiences at these things are trained. They hear share and assume the world is tidy. I said, I ask because the thresholding function in the figure shown matches, pixel by pixel, the path dependency artifact in a preprint I circulated on 10th of January. I held up my phone with the figure, enlarged. The moderator took a step as if to bar a brawl. I wasn't there to brawl. I'm happy to follow up offline, I said. I just wanted to register the question for the record. The room did what rooms do, split into those whose eyebrows jumped and those who studiously took notes. He said what he had planned to say for such a contingency. Of course, happy to talk offline, he said again, which is how power says not here, not where the record lives. I went back to Berlin with the taste of cheap coffee and salt. I emailed my dissertation committee chair. Not him, a different professor with a patience like weather. I asked for a meeting with the university's Research Integrity Office. I booked an appointment with a lawyer who does intellectual property for creative industries and said, I know this is an academic thing, but what is the layperson's version of theft here? He said, stealing is stealing, we'll translate the nouns. His name was Dr. Julius Pohl, and his pen tapped when he was thinking. I assembled a dossier like I was going to war with a bureaucracy because I was. I printed my email to him on 10th of January with the preprint. His reply on 11th January. Promising send code. My email on 12th of January with the link and a note, sharing under the co-authorship framework we discussed in December. The clone log of my private GitHub repo showing an access token from his ETH Zurich laptop. Screenshots of the figures in his keynote compared to mine, annotated. The field study receipts from Mokotów, buses 138, 218, a very unglamorous kebab place on Puławska, where I logged the afternoon foot counts. The conference program, with his talk title, and my chair's session, marked in yellow. On 28 March 2025, the Research Integrity Office scheduled our first meeting. A woman named Dr. Priya Nair chaired it. She spoke with the calm of someone who has been lied to by surgeons and grad students, and knows lies sound the same in all mouths. She asked me to start at the point where you would have told a friend what happened if that friend had access to all your receipts. I started with the Boston Ballroom and folded backwards to the January emails. She took notes on paper, which made me trust her because paper resists edits without scars. Then came the procedural grind that is both boring and holy. She sent a formal notice to him on 31st March, an allegation of research misconduct involving misappropriation of intellectual contributions and failure to acknowledge authorship under our university's guideline. 4. 3. She gave him 14 days to respond. She had to. Process is what keeps us out of pitchforks. He responded on 12th of April with a PDF that made my skin crawl with its calm. He wrote that the model was a long-term Engel Lab project, that I had assisted with data preparation, that any similarities likely arise from shared code libraries, and that authorship is being actively discussed, and I was overstepping by raising concerns publicly at the conference. He noted that he chaired my committee and that my emotional entanglement with the work might be clouding my judgment. Emotional entanglement. He made me sound like a jealous ex. Dr. Nair copied me on nothing, kept the process clean, but she called me on 15th April and said, "Make an inventory of everything you think you own in this project. We'll start there." I made lists until my wrist hurt. Code files, dataset schemas, meeting notes, idea scraps in my Scapel mind map. I marked the ones I would kill for and the ones I would trade. Here's where it tilted from academic to personal. He started showing up on my routes. He didn't know my building. Berlin protects those facts, but he knew I buy vegetables on Leopoldplatz on Thursdays, and that I run around Plötzensee on Sundays, and that I sit at Café Furtner when I need to debug in public so I don't howl. He stood across the street in a peacoat and pretended to look at his phone. He sent a postcard to my house with a smiling cartoon beaver that said, "Teamwork," and a note, "Let's be smart." Postcards are meant to be pleasant. The handwriting made my guts go cold. I didn't call him. I logged everything. I built a spreadsheet I called Watch Witnesses, Addresses, Times, Camera. I noted, 18th of April, 1942, Leopoldplatz, stood 12 meters from the greengrocer, left when I turned my camera. 24th April, 0705, Plötzensee track, circled twice opposite direction, did not wave, photo attached. 24th April, Café Furtner, sat 3 tables away with a book open, eyes lifted whenever I typed. I CC'd the log to Dr. Nair and to Dr. Pohl, the lawyer. I asked the Hausverwaltung to check our building's mailbox key logs, not because there is a log, there isn't, but to force myself to find out if the creep under my sternum had a root. On 26th of April, Dr. Nair convened the panel. That's what they call it when you are old enough to know the word committee is wrong for 3 people who will tip your life. A data ethics professor from Potsdam, a water engineer from Delft, and a philosopher from Humboldt. 3 voices from 3 angles. They asked me to walk through my contributions. They asked for dates. They asked for the place where idea becomes code. They asked which files were committed on which dates, and whether the preprint was public or private, private with a bespoke link. They asked whether I had an explicit co-authorship agreement, an email from December stating order. Engel, Alvarez, Marek, with a footnote about depending on contributions. They asked whether I had consented to him presenting the work at a conference. No. They asked how many people witnessed the Boston moment. I named 3 who had whispered after, plus the moderator who had said, quietly, "I will remember this." They asked me why I didn't confront him on stage. I said, Because I needed a record more than I needed catharsis. The philosopher nodded with her mouth. 2 days later, I filed for a Hausverbot, through the university an order banning him from my floor and lab spaces, citing interference with ongoing proceedings. Security printed a sheet with his photo and the words, "Do not admit." I felt ridiculous and safe. Break-ins are not only about doors. He escalated. He emailed 2 of my references, one in Madrid, one in Warsaw, to suggest we keep an eye on the story Sophia is telling, as if I had a talent for fantasy. He CC'd me so I would see it. He wrote to a foundation where I'd applied for a microgrant and told them he was managing authorship questions in my project, as if I were a dog he had to keep from biting. He sent a formal letter to the Research Integrity Office, accusing me of slander across borders. He set the tone to reasonable and dropped poison underneath. On 2nd May, I went to the Berlin police on Pankstrasse and filed a complaint under the Gewaltschutzgesetz for stalking, Nachstellung, bringing my watch log. A young officer with a jaw you could fold origami on took notes, careful, respectful. He explained that because there had been no threats and no explicit violence, the case would be slow, but the log mattered. He suggested a civil protection order if the appearances continued. I said I'd take all the paper I could get. If this were a movie, this is where I'd tell you I fell apart and a stranger picked me up. It's almost like that. Lukáš, the Czech postdoc who had turned at the keynote with that apology question face, emailed me a copy of his own notes. He had been in Engel's lab as a visitor the previous summer. He sent me a PDF of a lab memo dated 22nd August 2024, where Engel had outlined potential avenues and included a block quote that matched a paragraph I'd written in June in our internal Slack and never published. He wrote, "I didn't know what to do then. I know now." He offered to sign an affidavit for the panel. The kindness of precise men is an underrated miracle. Another ally, a librarian named Ulrike, who runs TU Berlin's research data management. She met me in a windowless office that smelled like old paper and salt. She showed me how to export a signed hash of my code repository state as of December 2024. She walked me through Zenodo, where I could archive a preprint with a DOI that would timestamp my method into the polite brutality of the scholarly record. She explained licenses like a person who likes laws because they keep bullies from making up their own. I uploaded the preprint version of the essay corridor heuristic to Zenodo on 7th of May 2025 with a DOI. The title was blunt: Heuristic Corridor Formation for Flood-Oriented Evacuation in Mixed-Income Urban Districts. The author list was mine, and the acknowledgements thanked members of the Urban Systems Group for discussion. I cited his keynote as unpublished talk referencing similar figures. I keyed the license to CC BY NC SA. I took a screenshot with the DOI highlighted and printed it twice, in case the internet decided to be a traitor. The panel issued preliminary findings on 20th of May. Dr. Nair called me in. Her eyes were kind but didn't flinch. The panel finds that substantial contributions by Ms. Alvarez to the conception and execution of the model were used without appropriate attribution in a public forum, she said, reading from a statement. The panel recommends that Professor Engel acknowledge Ms. Alvarez as co-author on any derivative work and issue a correction to representations already made. She spoke the last part slowly, like someone reciting a prayer they both believe and know won't be answered by the guilty. He appealed, of course. He wrote 12 pages about lab culture, about my vision. He argued that because he was PI on the grant, DACH 240,000, a number stamped under my eyelids from budget meetings, everything in the lab was technically his. That's not how authorship works. That's not how decency works. But money corrodes edges. He knew it. While the appeal wound, the unclever part of his brain finally made a mistake. On 1st June, he uploaded his code to a public GitHub as a gesture of openness. I opened it. In 3 files, he had forgotten to scrub my test comments, including the line SA corridor threshold. Tune this, Sophia. And my little habit of spacing variables in a way that all my friends teased me for. I screenshotted. I sent the repo to Dr. Nair and to Dr. Pohl. I gently asked the Engel Labs postdoc, who administered the repo, whether she had pushed it. She wrote back privately. He told me to. Didn't have time to clean, sorry. The code became the brick in the evidence wall that had been waiting for a hole. The university moved faster after that. On 12th of June, they barred him from supervising until the appeal concluded. On 18th of June, they froze his discretionary budget. On 25th of June, they published a bland statement about upholding our values of integrity, which everybody in our building read as blood without saying blood. He panicked in the way social predators do when the lights come up. He sent me an email that was a page and a half of tone. Disappointed father, betrayed mentor, benevolent dictator. He said, "We could have handled this as family." He said, "Do you know who you've embarrassed?" He CC'd 2 donors. The donors wrote to the dean asking if their money was in good hands. The dean, a woman with the posture of a bridge, replied with a single paragraph of policy and copied no one else. Policy is the quietest weapon. By July, I had learned how to breathe in my own lab again. Students came back to my desk for help with boundary conditions. We rotated the fan so it cooled whoever wrote the longest. We bought a second-hand plant and named it Mietvertrag because it looked like a lease. Complicated and necessary. We did the work. On 8th of July 2025, Dr. Nayer's office issued its final report. It was 21 pages and cost me 3 years of life to read. Points of fact, citations, dates, the figure overlays, the Git logs, the code comments, the emails requesting code for reviewers. The conclusion was what I needed, not what I wanted. Professor Engel is found to have breached research integrity standards by failing to attribute substantial intellectual contributions by Ms. Alvarez and by misrepresenting authorship in a public forum. The panel recommends 1. Immediate public correction, 2. Revised authorship to reflect contributions, 3. Supervision restrictions for 12 months, 4. Oversight of all lab-authored publications for the next year by the Faculty Integrity Committee. They did not call it theft, institutions rarely do, but they wrote the word misrepresentation enough to make it singe. He issued a clarification on 10th of July on his lab website that used the voice of a priest. In the spirit of collegiality, gratitude for the contributions of many. The keynote referenced emergent work. He placed my name second in a list of 3 on a forthcoming paper. He wrote, "Thanks to Ms. Alvarez for substantial modeling contributions." It was the kind of half-honesty cowards think will satisfy because they have never met a person who can count actually. I still filed a formal complaint with the ETH Zurich Ombuds office because the code clone had happened on their machine, and the keynote had been created on their network. They opened a file, assigned it a number, and promised to coordinate with TU Berlin. I learned to stop hoping and keep pushing paper. What pained me most wasn't the authorship. It was the hours I'd spent convincing myself to let my model leave my laptop because keeping it close would make me small. The lesson wasn't don't share. The lesson was share the way you lock your bike, visibly, so thieves go elsewhere or get caught. The personal victory everyone wants at this point is a job offer and a wedding. Life is less cinematic and better. Lukasz and I started taking early trains on weekends to nowhere in particular. Brandenburg Lakes, a weird East German theme park, the Polish border for pierogi. He showed me how to make kolache that didn't glue your mouth shut. He stood next to me at my defense hearing in September, not in the room because rules are rules, but on the hallway bench where we looked at ceiling tiles like fortune tellers. He didn't rescue me. He kept time with me. That is a miracle too. At my defense, one of the committee members asked, in the tone of a person who has sniffed blood, what I had learned about collaborative boundaries. I said that no is a muscle and paper is a shield, and kindness without clarity is how you get robbed. The room did the polite academic laugh. I didn't laugh. I felt a line inside me take root. He didn't show up to the defense. He sent a letter arguing I should be failed for unprofessional conduct in misrepresenting the Engel Lab's ownership of methods. The committee noted it like a cloud and moved on. I passed with minor revisions. Fix footnote 19. Clarify the order of steps in the sensitivity algorithm. Remove 1 more comma. Do you want the twist? Fine. It's a small, perfect mirror. 6 months after that Boston Ballroom, I sat in another giant room with too much carpet and not enough air. Not Boston this time. Lisbon, the International Conference on Risk Cities at the Centro de Congressos. Mid-afternoon light, stone outside, river. Lukasz beside me. A new keynote on ethics of urban modeling authorship was slated. The speaker was Dr. Priya Nair, the research integrity head, who had taken notes on paper. She started mid-story, not with introductions. She described a case in which a celebrated professor presented a student's figures as his own in a keynote and then appealed to lab culture when confronted. She outlined the process, the panel, the findings, the gentle euphemisms institutions use instead of the word theft. She clicked to a slide that showed two figures side by side, the Amaranth Corridor with the paper sailboat artifact and the corrected version with attribution in the corner, Alvarez et al., 2025. Then she said, "We have learned to believe the person with the receipts." Applause broke over the room as the slide changed to my figure, my colors, my axis labels. Nair smiled into the lights and called it by its name. I stood up so fast my chair hit the carpet with a hollow thud. This time there was no famous lecturer at the lectern to pretend he invented weather. This time I was the weather. I didn't go to the microphone. I didn't need to. I went out to the foyer, leaned on a pillar that held the roof of an honest building, and texted the person who had walked with me across this long, dull battlefield. Coffee? When I came back, we counted something no model can measure. Not downloads, not citations, just the number of people who knew, in the bones that make them write code and cook for each other, and sometimes do both in the same night, that you can stop a thief without becoming one. That you can learn to speak process like a second language and still keep your voice. And then, because I am still a person who cooks chickpeas on weekdays and counts bus stops in Warsaw, because bus stops are where cities become human, I went outside and breathed river air and thought of how long it takes a flood to recede after you open the gates. It takes exactly as long as it takes to name what happened and write it down.